Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews today. Scientists have confirmed that they have found the most distant galaxy from our own that's been discovered yet. They call the galaxy Z8 GND 5296 because of its distance. Astronomers find the new galaxy exciting because it appears to produce stars at an unusually high rate. The distance? 700 million light years away. Wow. CNN reports that Wall Street has been abuzz this week with news that J.P. Morgan is on the verge of reaching a $13 billion settlement with the government, but the deal could be just one of many. While the deal is not finalized, it relates to mortgage-backed securities sold by J.P. Morgan and the firms that later purchased, Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual, and these securities created by bundling payments from individual mortgages were a key cause of the financial crisis leading up to 2008 as the housing market imploded and borrowers defaulted on their loans. This pending settlement by J.P. Morgan and the government is the largest ever, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency, on behalf of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, has other big banks in the crosshairs as well. J.P. Morgan was just one of 18 financial institutions the FHFA sued back in 2011. And Jimmy Kimmel, on his late-night television show, sent a man out on the street to find out if Americans knew the difference between Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. Here's just a portion of that, and let me just warn you, it's pretty depressing.
Now, as you may know, Obamacare is just the nickname for the Affordable Care Act. They're the same thing. But lo and behold, we found people who did not know that, and that didn't stop them from weighing in on it.
We're talking about health care today, and which plan do you support, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act.
And what is it about Obamacare that you do not like?
I just think that there's a lot of holes in it, and it needs to be revamped. I think it's
and you think
hasn't been thought out.
You think the Affordable Care Act is a better plan than Obamacare?
Better, but I'm not happy with that either.
What do you agree with, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
I'm more towards the Affordable Care Act, but I'm also very sympathetic for people that don't have the ability to have proper medical insurance.
So the Affordable Health Care Act is still a better option than Obamacare?
Yes.
And why do you not agree with the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think it's not really available for all.
So the Affordable Care Act is more affordable than Obamacare?
Just the name says it all.
Right. You would agree with the Affordable Care Act?
Absolutely. I think it's nice that everyone can afford it, and everyone should be able to afford it, but to force people to pay something and then doctors to make something, limiting their ability to do their job, that's kind of anti-American.
Right. So Obamacare is un-American?
I think it's kind of un-American to force people. What if they can't afford it? What if they want more coverage?
And the Affordable Care Act is American?
I think it's more American because it allows people to make their own choices on what they want and who they want to work with.
Do you agree with the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare?
The Affordable.
And why do you prefer the Affordable Care Act over Obamacare?
I just don't agree with the whole Obamacare policy thing that's going on. I just don't agree with it.
And do you believe that an informed citizenry is essential to a democracy?
Yes.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Americans knowing what is going on, not just in our government, But in our classrooms, sad to say, there's so many that haven't a clue of what is going on. So while we are concerned about the federalizing of healthcare, the socializing of healthcare, socialized medicine here in America, there's also the federalizing of education. We've talked recently about Common Core, and I encourage you to go to changingworldviews.com, click on the link to our new archives page, and you can listen to the shows that we've done on education, done on Common Core, and not only for the federalizing of education, but on the international level, reaching into American classrooms. And that's what we're going to talk specifically about today with my guest, Professor Alan Quist, who I spoke with earlier, former state representative and author of several books on the issue. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Professor Quist right after this.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle?
You're listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, commentary on the news that's void of spin, but never short on passion. Now, here's more with Sharon.
Well, thanks for staying with me. Okay, my interview with Professor Quist on the issue of federalizing public education. Here it is. Alan Quist served 3 terms in the Minnesota House of Representatives, where he was chair of the Social Services Subcommittee and sat on the House Education Committee. He was chief author of numerous bills, including the bill that created Minnesota's Department of Jobs and Training, and he also played an influential role in legalizing home schools in Minnesota. He went on to be the Republican-endorsed candidate for governor in 1994 and was one of 7 delegates elected from Minnesota to the White House Conference on Families. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree, a Master's of Arts degree, and a Master's of Divinity degree, and currently is Professor of Political Science at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. Professor Quist is a widely recognized writer and author of the popular book FedEd, the Federal Curriculum and How It's Being Enforced. He and his wife Julie have 10 children. Welcome, Professor Quist, to Changing Worldviews. It's good to have you on the show again.
Well, Sharon, it's a delight for me to be back on. Thank you so much.
You know, for those who are familiar with this subject that we're talking about today, it's pretty upsetting stuff. But I want to cover as much as we possibly can in our short time together so that we can really understand what's going on and where this is headed. The standards basically line out what is to be taught, and textbooks then have to contain those things. This sounds logical. The problem is what are the standards? Would you please give us a brief overview of the federal standards, what the CCE is, and the We the People textbook?
Let me start kind of in the middle, Sharon, because every state give the students in their schools grades 3 through 8, and then once in high school, an achievement test to measure student progress. And these achievement tests, according to the law, have to be based on the state standards. So when we get to talking about the California standards, all you listeners need to know that this is what the achievement tests in California are based on. So it's how students are going to be evaluated, how schools are going to be evaluated, how teachers are going to be evaluated. Every school and every teacher teaches to the test, and the test is based on the standards. And so the state standards will tell the public, if they will look at them, what is going to be taught in the schools. These state standards, unfortunately, are primarily based on federal standards. And these federal standards were put in place under Goals 2000 and all of those laws. Mm-hmm. And they were largely written behind closed doors. They were written by people who were not accountable to the public. And the government standards, which is my area of expertise, were written by a group called the Center for Civic Education, a small NGO. It's a radical NGO, not accountable to the public in any way, shape, or form. They wrote the standards. They were authorized to write them. They were paid for by our tax money. They were put into a textbook with our tax money. The textbook form is called We the People, the Citizen, and the Constitution, a widely used textbook. Sure, it's used in California, and it's all a politicized attempt, maybe I should say success instead of attempt, to promote a radical worldview through education that really seeks to indoctrinate all of our kids into this particular position.
Okay, so let's just say briefly, what is that radical worldview?
The worldview is anti-American. Let's start there. It wants to undermine the basic principles of our country, basic principles of that are stated in our Constitution: national sovereignty, natural law, that is, there is right and wrong, that there is such a thing as truth, self-evident truth. They also undermine the whole concept of unalienable rights, that is, rights that people have because we're people, not granted by government. And so the whole foundation of our country is undermined, and then that foundation of our independent, free nation is replaced with things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a UN document, transnational citizenship or world citizenship, things like Education for Democracy, which is all about setting up a world federal system as opposed to a sovereign country such as the United States, which can really protect our rights of life and liberty and so on. So it's a very radical worldview, and it's aggressively pushed in the standards.
Okay, so we'll get detailed here on some of these. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights are still highly revered, by the American people. And I believe that if the American people understood what was happening, there'd be a huge outrage if they knew the things you just said. So that's why we're trying to reach people with the radio. But, I'd like for you to describe for us specifically how the Declaration of Independence is being taught today using these new standards.
Well, let me describe the way it's being taught in the grade 8 social study standards in California.
Okay.
Because this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. And the California state standards, academic standards, are interesting. First, let me clarify, by standards in education is not meant the question, what do students have to achieve? It's not how high is the bar. By standards is simply meant content. That is, what do you have to teach? What are the ideas or principles or truths or information you have to teach? So we're talking about curriculum. When we use the word standards here, we're talking about curriculum. What do you have to teach? So in the California standards, which do mention the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence, first of all, is treated always with the terminology of being a philosophy. And that may not seem significant because it does contain philosophy. The problem is that the national standards in civics and government written by the CCE define philosophy as being only philosophy. And the idea is this is what people thought 200 years ago. It may have been fine for them. They liked it. But that doesn't mean that it applies to us today. So when the term philosophy is used in education standards, you have to translate it according to the national standards because that's how it will be translated at the state unless it's specified to mean something other. And so to trace this then just a little bit further, you get things in the Declaration of Independence like unalienable rights. And unalienable rights or God-given rights are different from simply saying something like basic rights, because basic rights aren't necessarily unalienable. So what the California standards do is that once you get past the philosophy of the Declaration, whenever the standards talk about rights, rights are mentioned as basic or fundamental, but they are never mentioned as God-given, as unalienable, or as inherent.
In other words, they're not absolute, and they can change. They're not static, they're dynamic.
That's right, and government can trump these rights anytime it wants to. The question is, which is higher, government or rights? In the California standards, government is higher.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about those inalienable rights and also the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We'll be right back, folks.
Wow, radio couldn't get any better.
This is Cliff Kincaid of Accuracy in Media. I strongly recommend that you support the radio show of Sharon Hughes as an alternative source of good, reliable, and accurate information.
Incoming message.
Wow! All I can say is wow!
If you could read some of the emails, they're so heartening, and it's really a work that's become very effective. And so I would like to take this opportunity to just appeal to you to support Changing Worldviews. Go to the website, changeworldviews.com, click on the donate page, become a monthly partner, even if it's only $15 a month. That's $15 a month helps Sharon stay on the air and helps cover the cost. It is money that is invested in our future, our meaning, not Sharon's and mine, but ours as a nation. So it helps to get the message out. Consider supporting us. If you think about it, you go have a latte, it's $5. So 3 lattes a month would support Changing Worldviews in a big way. So I encourage you to go to the website and click on donate and make a commitment. Thank you so much.
We're talking with Professor Ellen Quist about federal education standards here in California and also around the nation. Before our break, Professor, we were talking about the Declaration of Independence, and I understand that Senator Steve Kelly, who's chairman of the Senate Education Policy Committee, said, quote, "The Declaration of Independence does not legally establish rights, and any attempt to characterize it as so is just plain false." Now, this is absolutely ridiculous. Everyone knows that that's exactly what the Declaration and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution does. You know, what's going on here? Why is education tearing down the pillars of our nation?
What Steve Kelly states there is exactly the position of the California standards and the radical federal standards in education. It's the view of the internationalists. It's the view of the one world government people. It's the view that the Declaration of Independence is of historical interest only, but it really doesn't establish anything legally at all, which is, of course, is totally false. There are numerous Supreme Court decisions which bluntly say that the principles, okay, not philosophy, the principles in the Declaration of Independence are embodied in the Constitution, and the Declaration and the Constitution have to be viewed as a unit, and that's the way the founders put them together.
You know, I've had Diane Ravitch on the show. She's the author of Language Police, and of course that's talking about political correctness, but you know, when you look at this kind of stuff and you do some reading, you realize that this is really a battle of words. It's about language. I mean, words such as fundamental versus inherent or inalienable, most people, you know, wouldn't even stop to think that, wait a minute, what's the difference here? It's very cleverly crafted using language to get an agenda across. I don't think that's okay.
That's exactly what it is. And if people would take the time to really study the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they would see how these word games go. For example, there's a preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And by the way, this is a UN document. It's not a U.S. document. In the preamble, you have the word unalienable rights mentioned, but that's only in the preamble. Then when you get to the statements of principle, then rights become basic. They aren't unalienable anymore. So you ask the question, why did all the communist countries sign the UN Declaration of Human Rights? They said this is exactly what we believe. Well, it's because in where the rubber hits the road, in the document itself, rights are only basic. Therefore, the government can suspend them any time that it wants. And in fact, at the end of the document, way at the end, the Universal Declaration says that no rights can be exercised contrary to the principles and policies of the United Nations, which is exactly the communist position, that government is on the top, and human rights, whatever they mean, are always subject to governmental interpretation, which means we have no rights at all.
Let's just talk about two areas that, well, maybe my generation, but the younger generation is not that familiar with because we've had so much Marxist education in the classroom. But in the area of capitalism and in private property, those two things are anathema in communism or in socialism, you know, extremism. And yet that's what this We the People textbook is saying, that capitalism is a dirty word.
That's exactly right. And in the California standards, where capitalism is mentioned, it is always mentioned in a negative, derogatory sense. It's always mentioned in terms of problems or conflicts or trauma and things like that. And so when our unalienable rights are described as basic instead of God-given, then when you get to the right of property, the Marxists, of course, say, well, sure, people have a right of property, but it's not unalienable. Plus, it can be a joint or collective right of property. So that's how they define it. And so the individual property rights, which are the cornerstone of a free enterprise system and really freedom, disappear. But you're right, Sharon, the way the language is used is key, because the radicals have redefined the terms to mean something other than what the public thinks they mean.
Yes, and that's manipulation, it's deception. I just did a talk talking about propaganda, and there's something called black propaganda, which basically is somebody comes in and pretends to be one of you, uses your language, but begins to manipulate it and change it so they can change your worldview from the inside, and you totally accept it. And that's what's happened in the schools. I think the teachers, by and large, are great people, but they've had people come in, use their language, and change their worldview in the process. Do you agree with that?
That's exactly what's happened. Plus, in the case, again, of the California standards, these standards have a veneer of traditionalism and a veneer of being knowledge-based about them. And a conservative, for instance, or a traditionalist could read these standards, and if this person doesn't know what the words mean, think that they aren't too bad. For example, the word civic republicanism is stressed in the civic standards. Well, traditionally, republicanism should mean representative government. I mean, our Constitution calls for a Republican government, meaning representative. What people don't understand is that the national standards, CCE, Center for Civic Education, have redefined republicanism to mean not representative government, but a form of government where the common good takes priority over individual rights, which of course is the communist view. So they have redefined the term, and unless the standards define republicanism as meaning representative government, it's in fact the radical worldview that's going to be taught.
Wow. Well, we're going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, I want you to help us understand the difference between process learning versus knowledge-based learning. So stay with us, folks. We're glad you're here. Hope you're learning a lot.
If you want to help change our world, then support Changing Worldviews. The mainstream media is doing everything to promote the liberal agenda in our government and society, and Changing Worldviews is dedicated to exposing this bias, bringing out the news they won't tell. Support the truth and become a monthly partner for a donation of $15 or more and receive our Tape of the Month, Follow the Facts newsletter, and a free copy of Facts, Stats, and other useful info. It's Changing Worldview's handy booklet for use in writing legislators, letters to the editor, calling radio talk shows, and sharing with others. It's a bullet point format with statistics, lists, and quotes you can use to help get your point across. Send your first $15 monthly donation to Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California 94975, 0624, or download the Partners Form off our website at www.changingworldviews.com.
And now, with a look at what's happening on the legal front, the president of the Pacific Justice Institute, Brad Dacus.
A new phenomenon has launched on the political scene, a political action committee advocating for the rights of non-believers and the separation of church and state. Called the Free Thought Equality Fund, it seeks to represent those Americans who claim no religious affiliation and to fund and finance candidates who will defend secular government against those who want to, quote, use the power of government to impose religious doctrines on everyone, end quote. Well, this PAC is a sad example of the misunderstanding of the basis of our nation's founding and the genesis of our Constitution, which protects the free exercise of all religions or no religion at all. I'm Brad Dacus.
To find out more about the Legal Edge, call 916-857-6900 or log on at pacificjustice.org.
I understand that in the papers you sent me for the new California academic standards, that it states that 25% of the California standards require the teaching of diversity and multiculturalism versus genuine history. So for our listeners that don't know what this is about, what does that mean?
Let me describe it in terms of the national standard, and let me describe it in terms of American history. The traditional approach to American history is to describe the immigration, the settlement, certainly some of the conflicts, but the growth, the writing of the Declaration, the writing of the Constitution, and the like, the establishment of basic principles that created a unified system of government into which people could come. You had a melting pot. You had the development of a uniform American culture. That ends up in what a lot of us call American exceptionalism. I mean, we are the world's only superpower for a reason. It's the principles upon which our country was based. The multicultural definition of America is to deny the existence of a central, unified system of principles and people and culture and exceptionalism, but instead to see America as being simply a conflict of different cultures. And so the national standards, for instance, in history, are built around the theme that American history is the collision of cultures. And the collision of cultures are the different peoples, European, African, Hispanic, and Indian. And it's all cultural conflict and give and take and the like. And so that's the theme. And in the California standards, there is so much emphasis on diversity, differing perspectives. Everybody has a different perspective. There's no truth really is where this goes. That this follows the national standard theme of it's just a collision of cultures and there is no unified unified America, the radical view.
So then the next thing is the process-based versus knowledge-based, which in my understanding, bottom line says that they're giving information to students and asking them to analyze or to accept without having knowledge where they can have a clear choice of whether they want to believe it or not. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. If we ask the question, how do you teach students to be able to think critically, for instance? People who believe in academic education and a knowledge-based education will say that, well, students can think critically when they have a lot of information upon which to base their judgment. It's like a jury in a trial. Let both sides lay all their information on the table, and the jury can think critically and evaluate critically when it has all the information. But the radicals don't believe in giving students much information. And for instance, in the California 8th grade social studies standards, there are 12 different statements that are standards. And of the 12, 2 use the word understand, which would be knowledge-based. The other 10 are all analyze. Students analyze the political principles in the Constitution. Students analyze the aspiration and ideals of the people of the new nation. Students analyze foreign policy. Students analyze the divergent paths of the American people. That's diversity. And so it should be the other way around. You should have about 80% students understand or know or something like that, and then you can analyze once that information is there.
Okay, as an example, in science classes, give them the information about evolution, give them the information about creation, give them all the knowledge of what both sides are saying as objectively as you possibly can, and then let the students analyze that. It's a belief and a trust that truth will stand up under any investigation, but when you're only getting one side, and it's not the truth side. You don't want the truth to come in because, whoops, guess what? They're not going to believe what you have to say. Well, before we close here, I would just like to give you an opportunity to share anything that you think the audience needs to know that we haven't talked about and what we can do about this.
Well, let me start with what we can do. People need to recognize that what the kids in the schools are going to be taught are now contained in the state standards. I mean, the state standards are just about everything. And they're going to drive the tests, they're going to drive the textbooks, they're going to drive what teachers teach. And so the time has come to look very carefully at what these standards say. And I highly recommend that people get some of our materials. The classic book, Fed Ed, is available at our website because it'll help people analyze, evaluate, because they'll have information, analyze what they're reading. Every state has to look at the standards, and I don't know of any state that doesn't need to make major revisions in their state standards.
Thank you again, Professor Quist, and we wish you well, and we're going to have information about your book on our site as well.
Very good. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks.
Okay.
Well, that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I just encourage you to help us get the information out to more folks so that we can reach more people with the truth. We can join our efforts here with those that are likewise trying to inform the American people of the absolutely critical, crucial issues going on in our nation today. I mean, I'm still thinking about the audio clip from the Jimmy Kimmel Show, The Man on the Street. Is it any wonder that the same politicians are getting reelected? That the polls show as high numbers as they do for Obamacare or for any of the other issues that are clearly not what our founding fathers put in place, limited government, giving liberty to our citizens. So it's up to us. It's up to you. Help educate. We're here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on KDIA AM 1640 at 4:30 p.m. and every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays for our 1-hour live stream show, which you can access by going to changingworldviews.com, listen online, or by telephone at 424-222-5360, or online, changingworldviews.com. Click on the Blog Talk Radio link, and that'll take you to our online live stream show. And there's also archives there as well. And so until I see you next time, this is Sharon Hughes saying it like it is.
Thanks for listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes. You can get more information on today's topic or order a CD of today's show by visiting changingworldviews.com or writing us at Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California, 94975-0624. You can also contact us at talk@changingworldviews.com. That's talk@changingworldviews.com. Our program is listener-supported, and we appreciate your tax-deductible donations to help us get the truth out on the important issues Sharon addresses on the show. So until next time, remember, stay alert, stay informed. We live in a changing world.